Before there was light, there was only the long sigh of the wind across the sleeping world. The land was old even then, but no one had ever seen it. Mountains stood like giants in the dark. Forests breathed in shadows, and rivers whispered secrets to the night. People lived by the sound of their steps, by the taste of the air, by the warmth of touch, but never by sight. They said the sky was endless black, that even dreams were dim because the world had never known the face of the sun. I often imagine what that must have felt like. A world that had no color, no dawn, no flame. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night and the lamp hums low beside me, I wonder if that darkness was peaceful, or if it was the loneliest thing ever born. They say in those early days, the great sky people lived far above, where the world was bright as day. They guarded something powerful, the fire of life, sealed in a box made from the breath of the stars. That fire gave them warmth, vision, and song, but they never shared it. The ones below, the people of the earth, were left to stumble through the blackness. The sky people said they were not ready, that the world below was too wild, too greedy, so they hid their fire, and the darkness stayed. But there was one creature who could not stand still in that endless night. His feathers shimmered gray like storm smoke. His eyes burned with mischief and curiosity. His name was Raven. Some called him a trickster, some called him a thief. But deep down, Raven was something more, a wanderer who could not bear to see the world cold and blind. He watched the sky people from afar, his sharp mind always turning. He saw the glow of their fire crack through the clouds like gold veins in stone, and he thought to himself, if light belongs to anyone, it should belong to all. Raven wasn't the strongest, nor the bravest, but he was clever enough to find a way into the world above. He had no wings strong enough to pierce the sky gate, but cunning always finds a path where muscle cannot. He waited, listened, and learned. For moons, he watched the sky people's rituals, their gods, their laughter. He memorized the rhythm of their song that opened the fire chamber each morning, and with every passing day, a hunger grew in his chest, not for power, but for justice. He wanted to see the faces of the children below when they saw light for the first time. Sometimes, I think about Raven as if he's sitting right here beside me, whispering his plan through the crackle of a campfire. Maybe that's how every myth begins. One restless soul who dares to change what everyone else accepts. You ever feel that too? That small ache inside that says there has to be more than this? Raven felt it stronger than any being alive. Now, before I go further, let me ask you, where are you listening from tonight? Maybe your room's lights are dim. Maybe you're wrapped in a blanket. The world outside already quiet. Imagine that darkness stretching forever. No sunrise, no color, no flame to guide your way. That's the world Raven lived in before he decided to climb toward the sky. And that's where our story truly begins. One restless bird, a world waiting for its first light, and a daring plan to steal the fire of the gods. They say no creature from the earth had ever seen the sky realm before Raven. The clouds were like walls, thick and unbroken, and between them stretched a river of wind so fierce it could tear feathers from bone. But Raven wasn't the kind to fear storms. He had lived his whole life in darkness, so what was there left to lose? One night, when the air trembled with the sound of distant thunder, he lifted his wings and began the climb. The world below was asleep. Not that anyone could tell, for in the dark, sleep and waking looked the same. His wings sliced through the heavy night air, his body rising higher and higher until the cold began to bite at him like sharp teeth. Each gust of wind pushed him back, whispering, "Turn around, little one. The fire is not for you." But Raven only laughed, that low, croaky laugh of his that sounded like old wood creaking in the wind. He said, "Then it's a good thing I don't listen to warnings." The higher he flew, the stranger the air became. The wind started glowing faintly. Just a shimmer at first, like moonlight trapped inside mist. He'd never seen light before. Not really. And he didn't quite understand what it was. It was soft but alive, like it wanted to reach out and touch him. He beat his wings harder, chasing that shimmer the way a starving man might chase the smell of food. And slowly the glow grew stronger, until it spread across the sky in ribbons of gold and silver. The sky realm was close now. He could feel it. His feathers crackled with static. His eyes narrowed against a radiance that felt almost too pure to look at. Then, out of nowhere, a shadow moved across that glow. Raven froze mid-flight. Before him stood a barrier, a shimmering curtain woven from threads of light itself. It rippled like water, humming with an ancient rhythm. Behind it, he could see faint silhouettes moving, tall, graceful beings, their bodies made of light, their laughter ringing like chimes. These were the Sky People. They danced around a great hall where, on a high pedestal, a single box pulsed like a beating heart. Fire, the very thing he came for. Raven landed on a cliff of cloud just below the barrier, his claws sinking into vapor that felt both solid and soft. He crouched there, watching. His heart thumped loud enough to drown out the thunder. For a moment, he almost forgot his purpose, lost in the beauty of that world. The Sky People shimmered like living stars, their movements smooth and peaceful. There was no hunger, no pain, no fear, only endless light. He whispered to himself, no wonder they never shared it. Who'd want to give this away? But then he remembered the world below, the cold villages, the mothers huddled with their children in the dark, the sound of teeth chattering through the long night. And in that memory, his resolve hardened. He spread his wings again, scanning for a way in. The barrier hummed when he touched it, a warning, a pulse of energy that sent a jolt through his bones. It wasn't a door he could break. He'd need cunning, he'd need disguise. Raven had many tricks, but this would be his greatest yet. He watched the Sky People long into the night, memorizing their paths. He noticed something, a young woman among them, her light softer than the rest, her laughter quieter, thoughtful. She often stood near the edge of the realm, looking down into the dark below, as if she felt sorry for it. Raven's eyes followed her every move. There, he whispered, that's my way in. So he waited, hidden among the clouds, until the time came. He plucked one of his own feathers, muttered an ancient word he barely remembered, and let the wind carry it through the barrier. The feather turned to a spark, then a seed. Then, with a sound like a sigh, it became a child, dark-eyed and small, lying near the edge of the sky realm. The young woman gasped when she found him. A baby, she whispered, cradling him gently. His tiny fingers curled around her glowing hand. She didn't see the faint flicker in his eyes, the cunning gleam of Raven beneath the disguise. The Sky Chief, her father, was curious but kind. Keep him, if you wish, he said, smiling. Perhaps he is a gift from the Wines. The daughter named the child Kale, meaning born of the clouds. And so, Raven entered the Sky Realm, not as a thief, but as a child born of light and trickery. From his new place in her home, Raven could finally see it, the firebox, glowing brighter than the stars, guarded day and night by the chief himself. Every morning, he pretended to play, his curious eyes always watching, always learning. And each night, when the Sky People slept, his heart burned with one thought alone. How do I steal the light without being consumed by it? Days in the Sky Realm passed differently than they did below. There was no night, only the soft hum of eternal brightness, where shadows lived as faint echoes and time walked in circles. The Sky People did not age, nor did they hunger. They floated between their golden halls, speaking in songs that bent the air itself. To them, the small child they called Kale, Raven in disguise, was a wonder, a living curiosity. He didn't glow as they did. His skin shimmered only faintly, and his hair was as dark as ink. But he laughed often, asked endless questions, and charmed even the most silent of spirits. The Sky Chief's daughter, who had taken him in, adored him as her own. She would hum to him, while the winds carried her melody through the bright fields of cloud, and every time she looked into his dark eyes, she saw a reflection of the world below, something she had never dared to look upon for long. Raven, beneath that innocent form, was always watching. His eyes followed the firebox whenever the Sky Chief opened it for the morning ceremony. The fire within danced like a living soul, changing colors: gold, red, white, blue, shimmering with the pulse of the universe itself. Every time the lid lifted, warmth spread across the realm, touching every spirit. It made Raven's disguise tremble. He could feel the heat against his chest, calling to him like a voice from home. But he dared not move too quickly. Patience, he reminded himself. Trickery wasn't about speed, it was about rhythm. Waiting for the one perfect beat when the world blinked. In those bright days, Raven learned the ways of the Sky People. He learned how they spoke to the wind, how they shaped the light into forms, birds, beasts, even floating islands of gold. They called these echoes of thought. Raven practiced them, too, and though his were darker and heavier than theirs, they held power. One evening, while the chief's daughter was shaping the air into glowing ribbons for Kill to play with, Raven asked softly, "Mother, why do you keep the fire locked away? Couldn't it make the dark world below beautiful too?" Her hands paused midair. "The world below," she repeated, eyes drifting toward the edge of the realm. "It is wild, child. It was not made for such power. Fire would consume it. But don't they get cold?" he asked, his small voice echoing through the light. "They endure," she said quietly. "The great Sky Chief believes each realm must find its own balance." Raven looked down through the clouds. Below, he could see only the deep black stretch of the earth. 1,000 villages hidden in night. The ache inside him grew stronger. "Maybe," he whispered, "they're waiting for someone brave enough to bring it to them." She smiled, unaware of the meaning behind his words. Then that someone must be wise too, for bravery without wisdom burns faster than fire. That night, when she drifted into sleep, Raven slipped from her arms. He walked barefoot through the glowing corridors, each step leaving a faint trail of smoke, a sign of his true self struggling beneath the disguise. The closer he came to the fire chamber, the more he felt it. The air trembled with power, humming like a heartbeat. He could smell the fire now, sweet, sharp, alive. It wasn't just heat, it was spirit. He peeped through the great hole's opening. The firebox sat upon its pedestal, surrounded by spirals of golden dust that shimmered like sunbeams. The Sky Chief slept in the corner, his form dimmed to rest. Raven's heart thudded so loud it felt like thunder. For a long while, he simply watched. He knew the risk. One mistake, one crack in his disguise, and he would be turned to ash before he could even whisper. But the thought of the dark world below tugged at him, reminding him of his purpose. He stepped closer, his small hand reaching out. The box pulsed softly, as if aware of his presence. He could feel its warmth licking the edges of his fingers. The fire inside whispered, "I know you, Raven. I know what you seek." He froze. The box was alive, conscious in a way he hadn't imagined. The flame inside wasn't just light. It was memory, emotion, the soul of all that existed. And for a fleeting moment, he felt shame. Was he stealing life itself? But then he thought of the people below, lost in their endless dark. He drew his hand back and whispered, "I'm not stealing you. I'm setting you free." The moment he said it, the box dimmed, almost like it understood. But before he could move closer, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He turned quickly, The chief's daughter stood there, her glowing eyes wide with surprise. "Kale," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Raven's mind raced. He had to think fast. I heard a voice," he said softly. "It came from the box. It called to me." She looked at the firebox, then back at him. For a moment, her expression softened. "You mustn't listen to it, child. Even light can deceive." She picked him up gently, her warmth wrapping around him like sunlight. "Come. The fire is not for us to touch." Raven rested his head against her shoulder, his mind already spinning. If not tonight, then another. He knew the way now. The fire had spoken to him, and soon, very soon, he would return for it. Days turned to cycles, and though the sky realm had no true night, Raven began to notice moments when the light grew softer, like the world itself was catching its breath. Those were the hours he waited for, the calm before the brilliance returned. He spent those times pretending to sleep, his small hands folded beneath his head, his dark eyes barely open. The chief's daughter would hum to him, her voice like a quiet river flowing through endless clouds. She loved him without knowing who he truly was. That was the hardest part. Her kindness made the trick heavier to carry. But Raven couldn't stop now. Every day, when the Sky Chief lifted the firebox to let its warmth spread across the realm, Raven's heart thudded in his chest like a drum. He could feel the pull of it, the ancient call that spoke not in words but in a pulse, a promise. "Come find me." One day, while the Sky Chief's daughter was weaving strands of light into a new sky song, Raven sat beside her, pretending to play with the ribbons. "Mother," he said softly, his voice full of false innocence, "why does the fire sing?" She glanced down, surprised. "Sing? Do you hear it sing?" Raven nodded slowly, his dark curls bouncing. "Sometimes at the edge of the wind. It sounds like it's calling my name." The woman hesitated, her glowing fingers pausing midair. "That's only your imagination, little one. The fire speaks only to those who are meant to guard it." Raven smiled, though she couldn't see the knowing flicker in his eyes. "Then maybe I'm meant to guard it too," he thought. From that day on, he began to listen more carefully. Every time the firebox was opened, he heard it, faint, distant, but real. A hum that grew stronger the closer he came. It wasn't a song made of words. It was more like emotion turned to sound. Warmth, longing, and something like loneliness. The fire wasn't cruel. It didn't belong in a box. It was alive, meant to roam, to burn, to give life. The Sky People had locked it away out of fear, not wisdom. And Raven, with all his cleverness, began to see that freeing it wouldn't just change the world below. It would change him too. He started practicing little tricks in secret, shaping his thoughts into forms that could move unseen. A shadow here, a flicker there. The Sky People's world was built on light. Darkness didn't belong there, which made it the perfect place for Raven to hide. He learned to bend the glow, to make the air shimmer and confuse the eyes. When the chief's daughter slept, he'd slip away and whisper to the fire through the cracks of the great hall. "You and I," he'd murmur, "we're the same, trapped where we don't belong." Sometimes, he thought he could feel the fire listening. The warmth in the hall would pulse softly in response, as if breathing. The connection between them grew. He began to dream of it, not as a flame, but as a heartbeat made of gold. Then, one day, the Sky Chief gathered the people. "The winds have changed," he declared. "Soon, storms will rise from the dark world below. We must strengthen our walls." The Sky People began weaving new barriers of light, thicker and brighter than before. Raven watched quietly. If those walls sealed shut, there would be no way out, no path for him to return below with the fire. He had to act before it was too late. That night, the air in the sky realm was restless. The clouds churned with faint tremors. The chief's daughter was asleep, her glow dim and peaceful. Raven slipped from her arms, his small feet making no sound as they touched the golden floor. He followed the hum, soft at first, then louder, guiding him through the hallways until the fire chamber loomed before him. The great doors were open just a crack, light spilling through like a living river. The firebox sat on its pedestal, trembling faintly as if it knew he was near. He crept closer, his disguise flickering with every step. His feathers itched beneath the illusion. He could feel his true self trying to break free. Just a little longer, he whispered. Let me take you home. The firebox's song grew clearer now, a melody that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. It whispered of creation, of warmth, of the first dawn waiting to be born. His small hand reached out again, trembling, ready to lift the lid. But before he could touch it, a gust of wind roared through the hall, slamming the doors wide. A figure appeared, the Sky Chief himself, tall and radiant. His light so fierce that Raven's disguise began to burn away at the edges. Kale, the chief said, his voice deep as thunder. Why do you stand before what is forbidden? Raven froze, his dark eyes wide. I heard it calling, he said, trembling. I wanted to see the light closer. The chief's gaze softened only slightly. Curiosity is the first step to wisdom, and to ruin. Go back, little one. Some flames aren't meant to be held. He turned away, closing the doors with a wave of his glowing hand. The chamber dimmed, and the hum faded into silence. Raven stumbled back toward his room, his heart heavy. He knew now that time was running out. The barriers would soon be sealed, and the Sky Chief's suspicion had been stirred. If he didn't act soon, the world below would remain forever in darkness. As he lay in bed, the faint shimmer of dawnlight painted the ceiling. He whispered into the still air, tomorrow, I steal the fire, or I never fly again. The sky realm never truly slept. But that night, something was different. The winds that usually hummed softly across the golden plains had gone still, like the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Raven, now fully aware that his disguise was thinning, could feel his feathers itching beneath the illusion of a child's skin. The faint shimmer that hid his black wings flickered in and out, revealing flashes of his true form in the soft light. His heart thumped hard enough to shake the walls around him. This was the night. There would be no second chance. He sat beside the chief's daughter as she slept, her radiant face peaceful, her light dimmed in rest. For the first time, guilt crept into his chest like cold smoke. She had given him warmth, kindness, even love. But the memory of the world below, cold, hungry, forgotten, burned stronger. He whispered to her, his voice low and trembling, forgive me. I'll return one day, but the fire must belong to everyone. Her breathing stayed even, unaware that her adopted child was saying goodbye. Raven rose quietly and walked to the window, looking out into the endless gold horizon. The clouds below rolled like oceans, faint lightning flashing deep within. He could feel the pull of the earth, his true home, calling from far beneath the clouds. Somewhere down there, the first humans slept in darkness, waiting for a light they didn't even know could exist. He spread his small arms, feeling his body flicker again. It was time to shed the lie. With a deep breath, Raven whispered the ancient word of transformation. The air shimmered, his form bending, twisting, unraveling. Feathers burst from his skin, black as night, his wings stretching wide. His eyes gleamed like molten gold. The Sky Chief's daughter stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name. But by the time she opened her eyes, only a faint shadow remained, a dark bird soaring into the glowing air. Raven darted through the winding corridors of the Sky Palace, his wings silent, his movements quick as thought. The guards of light drifted in and out, their attention focused on weaving the new barriers. He used the darkness beneath their feet as his path, blending into places light couldn't reach. Every beat of his wings carried the sound of risk, of destiny moving closer. When he reached the great hall, the firebox glowed brighter than ever. It pulsed like the heart of the universe itself. The chief's light had dimmed, for even he needed moments of rest. Raven perched on a beam above the chamber, watching the rhythm of the guards' movements. They followed patterns, circling, bowing, vanishing for mere seconds before reappearing again. It was in those seconds that he would act. He waited until the hum of the realm reached its softest note, the moment just before the eternal dawn would flare. Then, he swooped down silently, landing on the pedestal. His talons brushed the box, and the warmth surged through his body, filling every bone, every feather with heat. The fire whispered again. "You came from me." Yes, Raven breathed. "The world below needs you." The box trembled beneath his touch. "To take me is to change everything," it warned. "Are you ready to burn?" Raven hesitated only for a heartbeat. Better to burn than to live in darkness. And with that, he gripped the lid and lifted it. The moment the seal broke, the sky realm erupted in light. A roar of sound filled the air, the purest fire exploding into color. Red, gold, and blue twisting together like a living storm. It wasn't just heat. It was creation itself, spilling into every corner of the heavens. Raven's feathers caught the first sparks, pain searing through his wings. But he didn't stop. He clutched the flame close to his chest, wrapping it in his wings as the world around him screamed. The Sky Chief awoke, his eyes burning with fury. His voice thundered across the realm, shaking the clouds. "You dare steal from the gods!" Raven shot into the air, the fire glowing in his grasp. The Sky People rose in panic, their light weapons flaring. Bolts of golden energy streaked across the sky, chasing him as he weaved through the air. The realm itself began to tremble, stars dimming and barriers cracking. "Stop him," the chief cried. "He will destroy us all." Raven darted between the pillars of cloud, diving toward the great gates, the shimmering curtain that separated heaven and earth. The fire pulsed against him, burning his feathers to ash, but he held it tight, refusing to let go. He could hear the Sky Chief behind him, closing in, his light so bright it tore holes through the mist. "Give it back, Raven," the chief roared. "You cannot bear its weight." Raven turned his head just enough to shout back, his voice cracking with both pain and triumph. "It was never yours to keep." He threw himself through the barrier, the light splitting around him like water. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then the world below burst into view. The endless blackness stretched beneath him, cold and waiting. He dove, his body trailing fire, the sky splitting open with his fall. Behind him, the Sky People's cries echoed through the clouds. The chief's voice was lost in the roar of wind and flame. The firebox had been opened, and no power in heaven could seal it again. Raven plummeted toward the earth, his feathers blazing, his wings screaming against the force of the descent. The world was about to see its first light, and Raven, the trickster, the thief, the hero, would pay the price. The sky tore open like an old wound as Raven fell, his black wings wrapped around the stolen flame. The clouds screamed past him, turning gold, crimson, and white as sparks of light scattered in his wake. Each gust of wind felt like 1,000 knives cutting through his feathers. But still, he refused to let go. The fire inside him burned too bright to surrender now. The world below waited in silent darkness. The same world that had once cast him as a shadow, that now depended on his courage to bring them light. The fall felt endless. The sky realm shrank into a glimmering crown above. And for the first time, Raven felt fear not for himself, but for the fire he carried. The flames thrashed wildly, alive with power, whispering and howling all at once. "You cannot hold me, trickster. I was made for gods, not for mortals." Raven gritted his teeth and tightened his wings, his voice breaking through the storm. "Then learn to live with us. Because gods don't need warmth. We do." Lightning licked his feathers, thunder rolled beneath his belly, and as he descended, the air thickened. The scent of wet earth and salt filled his lungs. Below him lay an ocean of darkness, the land of humans, still and lifeless. The mountains were frozen in eternal night. The forests whispered in silence, and the rivers gleamed faintly under the cold moonlight. Every creature on the ground looked up, sensing something coming, something that would change their fate forever. Behind him, the Sky People had gathered at the breach, their glowing forms blazing against the night. The Sky Chief himself rose, his voice thundering through every layer of the heavens. "Raven, you will not bring chaos to my creation." His staff flared, sending a spear of light slicing downward. It tore through the air, grazing Raven's wing, and he screamed as golden fire spilled from the wound. He could smell his feathers burning, feel the skin crack and smoke. Yet he did not let go. The fire's light began to flicker, dimming under the pressure of the descent. Raven's vision blurred. He could no longer tell where the sky ended and the world began. For a moment, the flame inside his grasp whispered again, softer now, almost mournful. "You are dying, little thief." Raven coughed, his voice hoarse and trembling. "If dying means they'll live, then so be it." The ground rushed closer. He saw the jagged peaks of mountains, the wide plains of frozen grass, the slow shimmer of sleeping rivers. The heat from the fire melted the clouds around him, creating a burning trail that split the heavens in two. Then, impact. He struck the top of a mountain with a force that shook the land. A shockwave rippled across the valley, and the flame burst from his grasp, scattering into thousands of sparks that flew in every direction. The explosion was so bright that it lit up the entire sky. The first dawn. For the first time, the world saw color. Trees glowed with life. Rivers caught the golden hue of morning. Creatures blinked in confusion, staring at their own shadows, their eyes reflecting wonder. Raven lay broken among the rocks, smoke rising from his feathers. His wings were tattered, his beak cracked, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. The fire he'd carried now burned freely, dancing on the mountain peak, like a living spirit, shaping itself into streams of light that crawled down the slopes and reached the world below. Wherever the sparks touched, warmth spread to the homes of the first people, to the sleeping forests, to the deep oceans. For a long while, Raven couldn't move. The pain was too great, and the fire's power still pulsed in his veins, searing his insides. He thought this might be his end. But then, through the ringing silence, he heard voices, soft at first, then growing clearer. They were human voices, men and women, wrapped in furs and leaves, climbed the mountain, drawn by the glow. Their eyes were wide, filled with awe and fear. They had never seen such light, never felt such warmth. They whispered prayers, though they didn't yet know what a god was. When they found Raven lying among the embers, one of them knelt beside him, a young woman with dark braids and eyes that mirrored the firelight. "What are you?" she asked softly. Raven lifted his head weakly, his voice little more than a rasp. "A fool who thought darkness should end." The woman reached out and touched one of his burned feathers. "Then you are no fool," she said. "You are the giver of warmth." Her words carried through the people. They built fires in their homes, keeping the flame alive. They learned to cook, to build, to protect themselves from the cold. They sang songs to honor the black bird who fell from the sky, calling him the bringer of light. From that day, every hearth on earth burned because of Raven's courage. But not everyone rejoiced. Far above the clouds, the Sky Chief watched, his anger silent but deep. His realm had been pierced, his gift stolen, and his authority defied. Yet even he couldn't undo what was done. The light now belonged to the world below. He swore, however, that Raven would not go unpunished. Back on the mountain, as night began to fall again, Raven tried to rise. His wings were broken, but his spirit burned on. The humans offered him warmth, food, and rest. But he shook his head. "I have to go," he said quietly. "They'll come from me." The young woman frowned. "Then let us protect you." Raven smiled, though his beak was cracked and bleeding. "You already have, by keeping the fire alive." He spread his damaged wings and, with one final push, took to the air. It was clumsy, painful, but he flew. His shadow passed over the forests and rivers, carrying the promise of dawn. Above him, the clouds began to churn again. The Sky Chief's wrath was stirring. The war between light and shadow was far from over. They say the first dawn had barely warmed the mountains when the heavens split open once again. The Sky Chief's fury echoed like a storm across eternity. From that wound in the clouds poured his warriors, radiant beings of smoke and thunder, their armor forged from the glow of stars, their wings sharp enough to slice through the wind itself. They came in a storm of golden fire, descending toward the mortal world where Raven still flew, wounded and exhausted. The people below looked up in terror as streaks of light tore across the sky. The earth trembled, and even the rivers froze for a heartbeat. For the first time since the light came, fear returned to the hearts of the living. Raven felt the tremor in his bones before he heard the sound. His wings, torn and ragged, flapped weakly, every motion leaving a trail of smoke behind him. He had flown far from the mountain, hoping to hide among the clouds that now glowed faint orange under the newborn sun. But there was no hiding from the Sky Chief's gaze. The fire still lived within him, not as flame, but as light that pulsed faintly beneath his skin and feathers. That glow betrayed him. It was the heartbeat of the stolen fire, a signal to those who sought to reclaim it. When the first warrior reached him, the sky turned into a battlefield. The creature's voice thundered through the wind. "Raven of the earth, the fire you carry belongs to the gods. Surrender it, and your suffering will end." Raven laughed, though the sound came out rough and broken. "Tell your chief it's too late. The world has seen the light. Even if you kill me, it won't go dark again." The warrior raised a spear made of lightning and hurled it toward him. It struck Raven's wing, and a burst of blue fire spread across the sky. He spiraled downward, feathers burning, pain ripping through his chest. But as he fell, he twisted midair, catching an updraft, and managed to glide into a thick veil of storm clouds. He hid there, panting, his heartbeat echoing like drums in his ears. The rain around him hissed against the heat of his wounds. He thought of the people below, the ones who now sat around small fires, laughing, touching each other's faces, seeing what they had never seen before. That thought gave him strength. He spread his wings again and kept flying, deeper into the storm. But the Sky Warriors were relentless. One by one, they plunged through the clouds, their bodies blazing like comets. Each brought a different weapon, spears of thunder, nets woven from light, chains made of pure wind. They tore through the air, hunting the dark shape that darted between flashes of lightning. The chase stretched from mountain peaks to ocean tides, from the glowing plains to the edge of the frozen north. Wherever Raven flew, the storm followed. Below, the people watched in awe and fear. They could see the lightning above them shape itself into the form of wings. The elders told their children, "That is Raven fighting for our light. Pray that he survives, or darkness will return." Raven darted toward the sea, his feathers soaked and heavy. He could feel the warmth of the fire flickering inside him like a dying ember. He knew he couldn't keep running forever, so he did what he always did. He turned his weakness into a plan. As he neared the cliffs that marked the edge of the world, Raven spotted a vast whirlpool, a sacred sea vortex said to connect the sky, earth, and underworld. Legend said it was the breath of the great turtle, who carried the world on its back. If he could reach it, he might disappear into its depths, where even the Sky Chief's warriors couldn't follow. But getting there would mean outsmarting the last of the Sky Warriors. Their leader, a being called Solar Khan, whose wings burned brighter than the sun. Soothe was not like the others. He was ancient, merciless, and loyal beyond reason. His voice carried thunder wherever he went. "You've doomed the heavens, Raven," he boomed as he closed in. "Do you think the light will save them? It will only make them crave more. More power, more greed, more war. You've given them fire, but not wisdom." Raven's voice was weak, but steady. "Maybe, but they'll learn. Fire teaches, even when it burns." Soothe hurled his golden spear again, and this time it pierced Raven's side. The pain was unbearable. It felt like his very soul was tearing apart. He tumbled, feathers scattering like ashes in the wind. But instead of falling toward the sea, he veered upward, using the last of his strength to shoot straight into the clouds. Soothe followed, roaring in fury. The two clashed in midair, shadow against flame. Thunder roared across the heavens. Each strike shook the world below. Raven bit, clawed, and screamed, while Soothe struck with divine precision. Yet every time the warrior landed a blow, a spark escaped from Raven's body, falling to the earth. Those sparks became lightning, the eternal reminder of that battle. Finally, with his last ounce of strength, Raven flew straight toward the whirlpool. The sea below opened like a giant mouth, pulling everything into its spinning center. Soothe hesitated for the briefest moment, and that was enough. Raven folded his wings and dove headfirst into the vortex, vanishing in a burst of white light. The warrior screamed in frustration, slamming his fist against the waves, but it was too late. The whirlpool closed, leaving only ripples behind. The sky warriors hovered above the ocean, their armor dimming. Their leader was gone, their quarry vanished, and the fire below still burned. The Sky Chief's command thundered faintly in their minds, "Return. The world will learn its lesson." And so they did, disappearing into the heavens, leaving the mortal realm scarred but bright. From that day on, every storm carried the memory of that great chase, the lightning, the thunder, the rain, and deep within the sea, the whirlpool continued to turn, whispering with Raven's voice, "The light belongs to all." When Raven opened his eyes again, there was no pain, only silence. The world above was gone. He floated in a dim glow that shimmered like moonlight through deep water. Around him, currents twisted slowly, carrying soft trails of silver light. His body felt weightless, suspended between life and death. He tried to move his wings, but they were no longer wings as he knew them, more like shadows, bending and rippling with the water. The wound in his side still burned faintly, glowing like an ember, but the fire within him was calm now, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. For a moment, he thought he was dead, but then he heard something, a hum, low and deep, like the ocean itself was breathing. As his eyes adjusted, Raven realized he was not alone. Shapes began to emerge from the darkness, ancient, translucent figures drifting through the currents. Some looked human, others like animals, yet all carried an air of sorrow. Their faces glowed faintly blue, their eyes hollow but peaceful. One by one, they turned toward him. They didn't speak with words, but their thoughts brushed against his mind like ripples. "The thief who brought the fire has fallen. Welcome, Raven." He tried to speak, but no sound came out. The words formed only in his thoughts. "Where am I?" A figure floated closer, a towering presence shaped like a man, but with scales that shimmered like pearls. His hair flowed like seaweed, and his eyes held centuries of wisdom. "You are in the deep below," the being said, his voice like waves against stone. "The realm of forgotten spirits, those who once walked the land and sky. now resting in the cradle of the great turtle. The great turtle, Raven murmured. He remembered the old stories. How the world was born on the back of a giant turtle that swam through the cosmic sea. Am I dead? The being smiled faintly. Not yet. Between death and life there is always a choice, but few who come here ever return. Raven looked down and saw his reflection in the shifting light. His feathers were gone, replaced by soft streams of shadow and fire intertwined. He looked both alive and not, a creature caught between two realms. If I am between, he thought, then maybe I can still rise. The spirit chuckled. Even now, you think of rising. You truly are the restless one they speak of above. Do you know what you've done, Raven? Raven frowned. I brought light to the world. The sea spirit's eyes darkened. You did more than that. You broke the law of balance. The Sky Chief's fire was not meant for mortals. Now that they possess it, they will create wonders and destroy with the same hands. You've given them the power to dream, but also to burn. Raven's chest tightened. So you're saying I made a mistake? The spirit drifted closer. There are no mistakes, only changes. But change always demands a price, and the Sky Chief will collect it. Not from you, but from them. Raven's heart sank. He remembered the faces of the people who'd called him. Bringer of light, the laughter around the fire, the warmth that filled the air. Could all that lead to ruin? Then tell me, he whispered. How do I make it right? The spirit studied him for a long time. Then, with a gesture, he summoned the water around them. It swirled into images, visions of the world above. Raven saw humans dancing around flames, building homes, shaping tools from stone and metal. But he also saw anger, people fighting, fire spreading through forests, weapons forged from heat. The same flame that gave them life also brought them chaos. You cannot unmake what is done, the spirit said, but you can guide it. The fire is now part of the world's heart. If it burns to wild, it will consume all. If it's kept in harmony, it will sustain. To do that, someone must remain between realms, a guardian of balance. That, Raven, is why you were chosen. Raven blinked. Chosen? I wasn't chosen. I stole the fire. The spirit smiled knowingly. Do you really believe you acted alone? You think you outwitted the Sky Chief, but maybe the Sky Chief wanted this to happen. Maybe even the gods need a little rebellion to keep their creation alive. The words struck deep. Raven thought of the Sky Chief's thunderous anger, but also of his silence afterward. When the light spread across the world, perhaps the chief's wrath was not as absolute as it seemed. The spirit reached out and touched Raven's wounded side. The pain flared for a moment, then softened into warmth. The wound will never fade, he said. It will remind you of your purpose, to keep the fire in balance. But before you return, you must pass through the realm of shadows. Only then will you earn the right to walk both above and below. Raven hesitated. The realm of shadows. What is it? The spirit's expression grew grave. It is the place where forgotten dreams dwell, where the first gods cast their unwanted thoughts. Few return unchanged. Before Raven could respond, the currents shifted violently. The sea began to darken, the light fading into pitch black. The spirits around him drifted back, whispering softly. The sea spirit's voice echoed one last time. Go, bringer of light, the world waits for its guardian. Then, the waters swallowed him whole. He felt himself falling again, but this time not through air or sea, but through something deeper. Memories, voices, colors, all swirling together into endless shadow. The flame inside him flickered faintly, the only thing keeping him tethered to himself. And just before everything went silent again, he heard a whisper, not from the spirits, not from himself, but from the flame. The journey isn't over, Raven. You've only just begun. The fall through the darkness felt endless, yet it was not the same kind of darkness that once blanketed the world before the fire. This one was alive, breathing, whispering, shifting around him like smoke given thought. Raven couldn't tell if he was moving downward or inward. The world here had no direction, no sound of wind, no weight. It was as though he'd been swallowed by an old memory too vast to escape. The flicker of the fire inside his chest was the only thing that reminded him. He was still something, still someone. He tried to call out, but his voice broke apart before it reached his beak. The sound melted into the darkness, swallowed without echo. That silence frightened him more than thunder or death ever could. He was a creature made of noise, a trickster, a talker, a singer of stories, and now the world gave him nothing back. But then, there it was, a murmur, a thread of sound, faint but steady, rising from below. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but more like the rhythm of a heart, slow, heavy, ancient. Drawn by it, Raven began to move, his shadow wings spreading through the dark, gliding toward that pulse. As he moved, shapes began to emerge, faint outlines drifting in the mist. They weren't like the spirits he'd seen in the realm beneath the waves. These were heavier, sharper, as if carved from the void itself. They towered like mountains, yet their edges were blurred, their faces shifting constantly between forms. One moment they looked human, the next beastly, then like nothing Raven had ever seen. And in their silence, they radiated power, the kind that made even the gods of the sky seem young and fragile. Raven realized what he was seeing. The forgotten gods. These were the first beings, the thoughts that came before creation. The ideas abandoned when the Sky Chief and his kin shaped the world. They were too wild, too unpredictable, too full of hunger to be allowed near the fire. So the new gods cast them down, buried them in the shadow realm, and sealed it away from both heaven and earth. But the truth of the world still pulsed here, raw and unfiltered. Raven landed softly on a surface that wasn't ground but memory. It rippled beneath his claws like water. The heartbeat sound grew louder until it filled everything. Then one of the massive shadows turned its head toward him. Its eyes opened to white voids, glowing faintly. A voice boomed through the airless dark, not with words but through meaning. The thief of fire enters the forgotten place. What brings you here, child of ash? Raven hesitated, then bowed his head. I was told I must pass through the realm of shadows to return. The spirits said this was the way. The figure stirred, its immense form shaking the space around them. Few who enter this place seek to return. They come here to be unmade. I don't want to be unmade, Raven said. I want to understand. The shadows murmured, their whispers blending like storm winds. Another figure stepped forward, smaller than the rest, with the shape of a woman whose body was made of shifting smoke. Her voice was softer, yet carried deeper than thunder. Then understand this, little bringer. Fire is not a gift. It is a test. The Sky Chief feared what the mortals might do with it because he knew what we had already done. She raised her hand, and the darkness twisted into images, vision floating in the air. Raven saw the early days before the world, when the first gods held the primal fire. It burned so bright that it created and destroyed in the same breath. The forgotten gods shaped mountains and oceans with it, then in their anger, shattered them again. The fire had no loyalty. It only obeyed those who dared to wield it, and those who wielded it always fell into madness. Raven watched the images swirl, his eyes wide. So the Sky Chief took it from you, he said quietly. The Shadow Woman nodded. He took it and bound it in the heavens, promising to protect it from destruction. But in doing so, he imprisoned creation itself. Nothing could change, nothing could grow. The fire burned still, but the world below slept in darkness. You broke that chain. Raven, you didn't just steal the fire. you set it free again. Raven's chest ached. But if it's so dangerous, why would the spirits tell me to keep it alive? Another of the forgotten gods answered, his voice deep and bitter. Because balance is born from both shadow and flame. You cannot have life without the threat of destruction. You cannot have light without darkness. The fire must burn, but it must be watched. The realization hit Raven like cold rain. That's why they call me the Guardian, he whispered. Not because I own the light, but because I must keep it from burning the world. The gods stirred again, their forms pulsing with dim light. The first voice, the one that had greeted him, spoke once more. If you are to guard the fire, you must understand your place. You are not a god, Raven, nor a mortal. You are the bridge, the shadow between flame and night. The air trembled, and the darkness began to move toward him. It wrapped around his body, seeping into his wounds, filling the hollow spaces inside his feathers. It wasn't cold. It felt like calm, like silence itself choosing him. His pain dulled, his thoughts slowed, and for the first time, he felt balanced. Then the woman's voice echoed again, softer now. Carry the truth with you. When you return to the world above, remind them the fire was not stolen to destroy or to rule, but to remind creation that it is never finished. Tell them that light without shadow blinds, and shadow without light consumes. Raven nodded slowly. I will. The shadows began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist once more. The realm trembled, and a shaft of pale light opened above him. Not sunlight, but something older, deeper, like the memory of dawn itself. Raven felt himself rising toward it, the darkness sliding from his wings like water. And just as he ascended, the woman's final words followed him like a whisper carried on the wind. You are the first to balance, Raven. But remember, even balance must be tested. The night that followed was unlike any other. The air itself seemed alive, shimmering with a warmth the world had never felt before. Firelight flickered across the riverbanks, across the hides stretched over wooden frames, across the faces of people who had never known such brightness. Children laughed in wonder as they watched the flames dance, and elders whispered blessings over the glowing embers. Humanity had fire now, a gift that could warm, cook, protect, and build. Yet far above the celebration, the Raven sat alone on the highest cliff, staring into the horizon where dawn threatened to rise. His feathers, once deep black and proud, were now singed bronze and red at the tips. The fire had changed him, not just in body, but in spirit. He felt older, heavier, yet wiser than before. He had stolen the sun's secret, carried it in his beak through ice and storm, and placed it in the trembling hands of humankind. But deep inside, he knew gifts like these always came with a cost. Below him, the elders were already telling stories. They said the Raven was not just a bird, but a spirit who could walk between worlds, a bridge between the gods and mortals. Some said he had betrayed the heavens, others that he had freed mankind from eternal cold. The truth, as the Raven knew, lay somewhere in between. The realization hit Raven like cold rain. That's why they call me the Guardian, he whispered. Not because I own the light, but because I must keep it from burning the world. The gods stirred again, their forms pulsing with dim light. The first voice, the one that had greeted him, spoke once more. If you are to guard the fire, you must understand your place. You are not a god, Raven, nor a mortal. You are the bridge, the shadow between flame and night. The air trembled, and the darkness began to move toward him. It wrapped around his body, seeping into his wounds, filling the hollow spaces inside his feathers. It wasn't cold. It felt like calm, like silence itself choosing him. His pain dulled, his thoughts slowed, and for the first time, he felt balanced. Then the woman's voice echoed again, softer now. Carry the truth with you. When you return to the world above, remind them the fire was not stolen to destroy or to rule, but to remind creation that it is never finished. Tell them that light without shadow blinds, and shadow without light consumes. Raven nodded slowly. I will. The shadows began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist once more. The realm trembled, and a shaft of pale light opened above him. Not sunlight, but something older, deeper, like the memory of dawn itself. Raven felt himself rising toward it, the darkness sliding from his wings like water. And just as he ascended, the woman's final words followed him like a whisper carried on the wind. You are the first to balance, Raven. But remember, even balance must be tested. The night that followed was unlike any other. The air itself seemed alive, shimmering with a warmth the world had never felt before. Firelight flickered across the riverbanks, across the hides stretched over wooden frames, across the faces of people who had never known such brightness. Children laughed in wonder as they watched the flames dance, and elders whispered blessings over the glowing embers. Humanity had fire now, a gift that could warm, cook, protect, and build. Yet far above the celebration, the Raven sat alone on the highest cliff, staring into the horizon where dawn threatened to rise. His feathers, once deep black and proud, were now singed bronze and red at the tips. The fire had changed him, not just in body, but in spirit. He felt older, heavier, yet wiser than before. He had stolen the sun's secret, carried it in his beak through ice and storm, and placed it in the trembling hands of humankind. But deep inside, he knew gifts like these always came with a cost. Below him, the elders were already telling stories. They said the Raven was not just a bird, but a spirit who could walk between worlds, a bridge between the gods and mortals. Some said he had betrayed the heavens, others that he had freed mankind from eternal cold. The truth, as the Raven knew, lay somewhere in between. He had not acted out of rebellion alone, nor compassion alone, but because he could not stand silence when warmth was possible, could not stand darkness when light could be made. He watched as the first cooking fires burned in the distance, their smoke curling into the stars like prayers. Those thin, grey trails became symbols of hope, of survival, of human defiance. And though no one could see him high above, the Raven bowed his head. He had given them the gift they did not know they needed, and now they would never be the same. But the Great Spirit was watching too. From the folds of the clouds, a shadow passed, old, patient, eternal. It did not roar or strike, for the Great Spirit was beyond wrath. Instead, it sighed, and in that sigh the trees bent, the rivers trembled, and even the flames flickered. The Raven felt it deep in his bones, the knowing that his act would not be forgotten. The world would remember him not just as hero or thief, but as both. For in every age, every tribe, and every fire that burned, his story would live, whispered in the smoke, echoed in the core of his descendants, and remembered in the warmth of every flame. That night, as the people slept beside their fires, the Raven took flight once more. His wings, heavy but steady, carried him through the mist. The moon followed him, silent and pale, as if curious about the creature who had dared challenge the sun. The stars blinked in approval. The wind whispered songs of courage, and somewhere, deep in the darkness, the faint sound of a new world awakening echoed back to him. Fire had come to earth, and with it, both creation and destruction, both comfort and danger. The Raven understood this balance now. He was no longer just the trickster or the thief. He was the bearer of light, the keeper of consequence, and the eternal symbol of what it means to risk everything for something greater. And so, he vanished into the endless night, his silhouette melting into the starlit sky. Below, the fire crackled gently, spreading warmth across the world. And though the people would never see him again, They would always feel him, in the sparks that leapt from the wood, in the heat that chased away the cold, in the stories that told of the bird who stole the sun. For the raven had become more than legend. He had become the pulse of life itself. Days turned into moons, and moons into seasons. The world, now bathed in the gentle light of fire, began to reshape itself. What had once been endless darkness gave way to warmth and color. People learned to cook their food, forge their tools, and gather around the flames to tell stories deep into the night. Fire became the heart of every home, the protector of every village, and the silent witness to love, grief, and birth. Yet in the midst of this new age, strange things began to happen. The smoke that curled up from every hearth seemed to whisper, as if it remembered something or someone. Children swore they could hear the faint call of a bird in the haze. Elders said it was the raven spirit, watching, guarding, reminding them that light was never free. Every fire that burned brighter also carried a shadow that danced behind it. And in that balance lay the truth of the raven's gift. One night, as storm swept across the plains, the wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing branches from trees and sending sparks flying from the village fires. The people rushed to protect their homes, but the fire, wild and hungry, leapt from hut to hut, devouring all it touched. The villagers screamed and scattered, and in that chaos, the elders remembered the old stories, that fire was not a toy, not a servant, but a living spirit. The raven had warned them, though not with words. He had shown it in the scorch of his feathers, in the sorrow of his eyes before he vanished. The people had taken his gift, but they had forgotten the burden that came with it, respect. When the storm passed, the village was nothing but ash and smoke. Yet in the center of the ruin, something glowed faintly, a single coal, alive and breathing, refusing to die. A young boy, no older than 10, approached it. His hands trembled as he cupped the ember in a piece of bark and carried it carefully to the river's edge. There, he whispered the ancient words his grandmother had taught him, words of gratitude to the spirit of fire, and placed the coal on a stone. To his astonishment, the ember fled, not in anger, but in understanding. The flame rose once, golden and soft, before dissolving into the night air. Above the boy, a single black feather drifted down, landing gently in his hand. He looked up, eyes wide, and thought he saw a dark shape gliding across the moon. The raven was still watching. From that night onward, the people learned to live in harmony with the fire. They built sacred pits, where flames would burn only with permission and prayer. The smoke became a language, a bridge between the earth and the sky. They said the smoke carried their words to the Great Spirit, and that every curl of it bore the raven's blessing. Across tribes and generations, the tale grew that the raven had not merely stolen fire, but had given humanity both its greatest gift and its greatest test. Fire could warm or destroy, light or blind. It was up to mankind to decide which it would be. And so, as the years rolled on, the raven's legend spread across the land. His name was carried in songs, carved in totems and painted on cave walls. Some tribes called him the Great Trickster, others the Wise Giver, but all agreed on one truth, that without him, there would be no stories to tell, no light to see, no warmth to share. For in every flicker of flame, in every whisper of smoke, the spirit of Raven still lived, eternal, mysterious, and forever watching. Many winters later, when the memory of the firestorm had faded into legend, an old shaman named Tawa began to dream of wings. Each night, he saw a vast bird flying over oceans of smoke and stars. The feathers shimmered like molten metal, and the eyes, deep and knowing, glowed with a light that was not of this world. The raven spoke no words, but every time Tawa woke, he could still feel the echo of its voice within his bones, as if the bird had whispered directly into his soul. The dreams grew stronger each night until they were no longer dreams but visitations, visions, that blurred the line between spirit and waking world. One morning, after such a vision, Tower rose before dawn, walked to the river, and saw something glinting on the shore. A single black feather, smooth and warm to the touch, though frost still covered the ground. He knew then that the spirit of Raven had returned. He carried the feather to the sacred fire pit in the center of the village. The embers were still glowing from the night's watchfires, soft and orange like sleeping eyes. Tower knelt, placed the feather near the warmth, and began to chant in a low voice. The flames stirred. A sudden gust of wind swirled the ashes, and a figure began to form in the smoke, wings wide, eyes burning, the raven shadow. The villagers who gathered gasped, some falling to their knees. They had told stories of the raven for generations, but none had ever seen his spirit rise from the fire like that. The air hummed with power, ancient and electric. Tower closed his eyes and listened. The raven spoke again, not in words, but in feeling. He saw flashes of mountains cracking, rivers changing their paths, and stars dimming. Fire was spreading beyond its purpose. Humans had begun to forget the balance again. That night, the shaman told the people what he had seen. He warned them that the fire, the very thing that had given them life, could one day consume everything if they lost their respect for it. Raven gave us fire to build, Tower said, his voice trembling like dry leaves. But we must never forget it can also burn. His words struck deep. Yet the younger men, strong and proud, only half listened. They believed they had mastered fire. They used it to harden weapons, to shape clay, to claim lands from others. To them, fire was no longer sacred. It was a tool of power. The elders mourned this arrogance, sensing that something dark was stirring again. That winter was colder than any before. The snows fell for 40 days straight, and the rivers froze solid. The villagers huddled around their fires, praying for warmth. But with each passing night, the flames grew weaker. The wood burned faster than it should, the smoke turning black and heavy. The people whispered that the fire was angry, that the raven had seen their pride and turned away. And Tower, lying awake beside his dying hearth, felt the truth of it in his chest. The world had shifted again, and soon the raven's test would return. He rose once more before dawn, carrying the black feather wrapped in deerskin. He walked to the cliffs, where the wind screamed like ghosts, and the sea below crashed in furious rhythm. Holding the feather high, he cried up to the sky, "Raven, we have forgotten, but I have not. Show me how to guide them again." His voice echoed through the storm. Lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating a vast shadow that circled above, the shape of wings. Massive and eternal, the raven had heard him, but this time, the lesson would not come in whispers or dreams. It would come in fire on trial. The night after Tower's cry reached the heavens, the wind shifted. It was not the cold wind of winter nor the soft breeze of spring. It was heavy, charged, and alive. The villagers felt it before they saw it. The air thickened. The flames in their hearths flickered wildly, and animals began to stir restlessly in their pens. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains, deep and slow, like a giant awakening from sleep. Then came the lighter, sudden burst across the horizon that turned the snow into gold for a heartbeat. It wasn't lightning, not truly. It was fire falling from the sky, streaking like rain, each spark landing softly, harmlessly, but glowing as if alive. The villagers poured out of their homes, shielding their eyes. Above them, the great silhouette of wings spread across the storm. The raven had come again. Tower stood in the center of the village, the black feather in his hand, his heart pounding. He knew this was no ordinary storm. The raven was calling them to prove their worth. The people had forgotten respect, forgotten gratitude. The fire that once gave them life now reflected their greed. The sparks that fell to the earth did not burn wood or flesh, they burned pride. Each ember that touched the ground revealed truth. A warrior known for his arrogance fell to his knees as his fire turned cold. A hunter who had boasted of his kill saw his torches extinguish before his eyes. But the children, the pure, the untainted, saw their fires grow brighter, gentler, dancing around them in circles of light. It was as if the raven had come to separate the hearts that still remembered, reverence from those that had drowned in desire. The villagers cried out in fear, their flames sputtering one by one. But Tower did not run. He raised the feather high, chanting the ancient words that spoke of humility, of balance, of giving back as much as one takes. His voice rose above the howling wind, steady and full. Around him, the ground trembled. The flames gathered toward him, swirling in a spiral of gold and red, forming a towering pillar that reached the sky. Within that pillar, the shape of the raven appeared, eyes like twin suns, wings outstretched, the same glow he had carried when he stole fire from the heavens. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Every sound, every heartbeat, every breath was drawn into that light. Then the raven spoke, not with a voice of words, but with the voice of nature itself. "You have forgotten," the spirit said, echoing in their minds. "You have turned my gift into your pride. Fire is not your servant, it is your mirror." The villagers wept, falling to the ground. The flames pulsed once, twice, and then calmed, their fury fading into warmth. "Remember the promise," the voice continued, "to protect the flame, to honor its balance. For as long as you remember, the fire will love you. But when you forget again, it will return to me." The words sank deep into their souls, leaving a silence so profound that even the wind refused to move. When the light faded, the raven was gone. Only Tower remained standing, the feather still glowing faintly in his hand. Around him, the snow had melted in a perfect circle, revealing green grass beneath a sign of renewal. The villagers rose, humbled, their faces streaked with tears. The fire in their hearts rekindled on its own, small but steady, glowing like a heartbeat. They understood now. Fire was not merely warmth or light, it was life itself, a living spirit that demanded care, humility, and memory. And from that day on, they swore to keep it sacred. That night, as the stars returned and peace settled over the valley, Tower sat by the new flame and whispered his thanks. He knew the raven had not punished them, but reminded them. The test had not been about destruction, it had been about awakening. Somewhere in the distant sky, he thought he heard wings flapping once more, followed by a low, knowing call carried on the wind. The raven was watching, as he always did. Weeks passed after the trial of flames, and though the air still carried the scent of smoke, the hearts of the people were calm. The village rebuilt slowly, but differently this time. No one dared light a fire without bowing their heads first. Children were taught to whisper a prayer before striking the first spark. Warriors no longer carried torches into battle for a pride, but as symbols of protection. And at the center of it all stood Tower, the old shaman, who now bore the title Keeper of the Feather. His hut had become a place of learning, where he spoke not of power, but of balance. Fire is not ours to own, he would tell the young ones who gathered around him. Eyes wide, it is a spirit we borrow, a light we tend, and when our time is done, we return it to the raven. The children would sit quietly, mesmerized by the rhythm of his voice and the faint shimmer of the black feather resting in the firelight beside him. As seasons changed, people from neighboring tribes began to visit. Word of the raven storm had spread far beyond the valley, across mountains, through forests, and along rivers that carried whispers faster than wind. Some came in curiosity, others in fear, seeking to understand the mystery of this lord of fire. Tower welcomed them all. He taught them the ancient chant, the same one he had spoken on the night the raven appeared. He taught them the meaning of flame, that it gives and it takes, it nurtures and it consumes. He showed them how to build fires that breathed cleanly, fed with care and never grieved. And as the visitors left, they carried the teachings with them, passing them from tribe to tribe, until soon the lore of fire spread across the land like light itself. But Tower knew something deeper, something he had not yet shared. Each night, when he sat alone beside his hearth, the flame would flicker in strange ways, bending toward him as if listening. Sometimes, in that quiet glow, he saw eyes, too tiny, burning orbs staring back from the heart of the fire. The raven was still near. He felt it in his bones, in his dreams, in the wind that brushed against his hut. One night, as he drifted between sleep and wakefulness, he heard a soft whisper, "The fire is safe." For now, the voice carried warmth, pride, and a note of sadness. But remember, Tower, every gift must be guarded, or the world will fall back into shadow. He woke with a shiver, the feather beside him glowing faintly, as if agreeing. Years rolled by. The children who once sat before him grew into hunters, mothers, chiefs, and healers. They built their lives around the fire, not as masters, but as stewards. Every festival began with a flame lit from the first hearth. The sacred fire Tower had tended since the raven's trial. It never went out, not once. Even when storms raged, when famine struck, or when grief swept through the people, the flame remained alive, a heartbeat of the world. Travelers would bring coals from the first hearth back to their own villages, believing it carried the raven's blessing. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Tower gathered his people once more. His hair had turned white as snow, his voice softer but strong. "The raven gave us more than fire," he said, his eyes glinting in the fading light. "He gave us a mirror to see ourselves. Every spark is a reflection of our spirit. If we forget humility, it burns. If we remember gratitude, it warms. That is the lore of fire." He held the feather up one last time, and as he did, a wind rose from the east, gentle, cool, and familiar. The people looked up and saw a shadow pass across the dying sun, wings spread wide, gliding gracefully toward the horizon. The raven had come to listen, just as he had promised. That night, the flames burned steadier than ever, each one flickering in perfect rhythm, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The people slept in peace, unaware that a new chapter in their story was quietly beginning, one that would test not just their reverence, but their very understanding of the gift they had been given. Decades passed since Tower's voice last echoed through the valley, and the first hearth still burned, though now few remembered the true weight of its flame. The children who had once whispered prayers before lighting kindling had grown into elders themselves, and their grandchildren played by the fire without knowing its story. The world had grown busier, louder. Tribes had grown into villages, and villages had begun to trade with one another, forging paths through forest and stone. Fire was everywhere now, in every forge, in every torch carried through the night, and though it burned brighter than ever, it no longer carried reverence. People saw it as a tool, as Tower once feared. They used it to melt metal, to drive beasts from the woods, even to wage war against neighboring clans. The Lord of Fire had become a tale for old men, a bedtime story told to children who had long stopped believing in spirits. One cold evening, as the wind howled through the valley and snow dusted the roofs of the huts, a stranger appeared at the edge of the village. He was tall, wrapped in a cloak of grey feathers that shimmered faintly in the firelight. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his eyes, those eyes, gleamed like molten gold. He carried a walking stick carved with the shape of a bird at its tip. The guards stopped him, asking who he was and what business he had in their land. "A traveler," he said simply, his voice deep but soft, like thunder wrapped in velvet. I've come seeking the flame that never dies, the gods exchanged uncertain glances before leading him to the great hearth in the center of the square, the very same one that had burned since the time of Tower. The fire still flickered there, though dimly, as if tired. The stranger knelt beside it, his hand hovering above the embers. He closed his eyes. The villagers gathered, watching as he whispered something under his breath. The flame brightened, just a little, as if recognizing him. The elders gasped, murmuring to one another, for they had not seen the fire stir like that in years. One of them stepped forward, an old woman with lines carved deep into her face. "Who are you?" she asked. The stranger lifted his head slowly, and when his hood slipped back, the crowd drew in a sharp breath. His hair was streaked with silver, his skin darkened by travel and time, but it was his eyes that silenced them. Eyes that seemed to hold the memory of stars and storms. The same eyes Tower once described in his stories. "I have seen the raven's shadow," the man said, "beyond the mountains, where the rivers boil and the trees speak his name. He watches still, waiting for the world to remember him." The people looked at one another uneasily. Few among them even believed the raven had been real. And now this wanderer spoke as if he had seen the spirit himself. A young blacksmith laughed. "Old myths," he said, throwing a piece of coal into the fire. "The raven was a story to scare children." But before the ember could touch the flame, the stranger caught it midair with impossible speed. His eyes glinted, and for a moment, just a moment, the fire roared up in front of him, golden and fierce, throwing sparks high into the air. The crowd stumbled back, shielding their faces. The flame calmed as quickly as it had risen, leaving behind silence and the faint smell of feathers singed in heat. "You have forgotten," the stranger said quietly, looking not angry but mournful. "The fire does not belong to you. It belongs to him." He pointed toward the sky, where the moon hung pale and watchful. "And if you forget too long, he will take it back." The people said nothing. The blacksmith stared at his hands, trembling, the laughter gone from his face. The stranger rose, tightened his cloak, and turned to leave. "Guard your flames," he said over his shoulder, "and guard your hearts. The raven's patience is long, but not endless." Then, before anyone could stop him, he stepped into the shadows and vanished, leaving behind only a single black feather that drifted lazily into the dying fire. That night, the villagers could not sleep. The flames that had once brought them comfort now seemed to whisper in strange tongues. Some said they saw wings moving in the smoke. Others heard faint cries above the wind. For the first time in generations, fear and wonder returned to the people. They began to ask questions again. Who was the stranger? Was the raven truly watching? And had they, in their pride, once again lost the spirit's favor? The days that followed the stranger's visit were uneasy. The villagers went about their chores, but an invisible weight hung over them. The laughter that once danced around the fires was gone, replaced by murmurs and long silences. The black feather the stranger had left behind was placed beside the first hearth, resting on a stone, a sacred memory. Yet even as it sat there, the flame seemed uncertain, wavering like a frightened heartbeat. The cold grew sharp each night, creeping through the huts no matter how much wood they burned. It was as if the fire had grown tired, its spirit fading. When the elders tried to kindle new flames, they sputtered and died, smoke rising without heat. For the first time since the days of Tower, people began to fear the dark. Then came the night when the fire refused to burn. The wind was cruel and heavy, dragging frost through the cracks in every home. Children huddled close to their mothers, rubbing their hands together in vain. Men struck flint after flint, but each spark winked out the instant it was born. Panic spread like a plague. "The raven has taken it back," someone cried. "We forgot the prayers," shouted another. In desperation, They ran to the great hearth in the village square, hoping that the sacred flame might still be alive. But when they arrived, all that remained was ash. The black feather lay untouched in the center, glowing faintly as if it held the last memory of warmth. The village chief, a proud man named Kalo, stood before the people and tried to calm them. "It's just a storm," he said, his voice shaking despite his effort to appear strong. "We'll find dry wood. We'll rebuild the fire." But when he reached for the feather, the moment his fingers brushed it, a chill shot up his arm like ice. He gasped and pulled back. The feather had frozen solid. The people whispered, stepping away, fear rising in their throats. Kilo looked up to the sky, where clouds gathered like thick smoke, hiding the moon. For a fleeting instant, a dark shape passed behind them, vast wings that blotted out the stars. A sound echoed through the night, deep and distant, not thunder, but a single, hollow chord that shook the air. By dawn, the snow had buried half the valley. The river, once roaring and alive, now lay under a glass of ice. Crops froze in the fields, and animals huddled in their dens, refusing to stir. The world itself seemed to have gone cold. The people tried to recall Towa's teachings, chanting the old words, but without flame, the words felt empty. The balance was broken. For too long, they had taken fire for granted, bending it to their will, forgetting its sacred breath, and now it had left them, gone back to its master, the raven. In the silence of that endless winter, strange signs began to appear. Charred feathers scattered across the snow, though no bird could be found. Smoke rose from the frozen river at night, glowing faintly blue before vanishing with the morning sun. The children claimed to see eyes in the frost, watching them from the trees. Even the air itself began to hum, a low vibration, like the world remembering something old and powerful. The elders took it as a warning. They gathered the people and spoke of Tawa's time, of the trial, of the lesson that had once restored balance. "We have fallen again," one said, "and the raven will not return easily this time." That evening, as the villagers gathered in darkness, Kalo stood before the dead hearth, his breath clouding in the air. "If the fire has gone to him," he said, "then we must go to him too." The crowd gasped. "Over the mountains," someone asked. "No one has ever come back from there." Kalo nodded. "Then it's time someone did." His eyes hardened with resolve. "We will seek the raven. We will beg forgiveness. And we will bring the fire home." A quiet determination spread among the people, fragile but real. The cold might take their bodies, but pride would not take their souls. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the raven waited, not as enemy, but as test. The journey would be long, and not all would return. Yet if the flame was to live again, someone had to face the shadow that guarded it. And so, with frozen hearts and trembling hands, the people began to prepare for the pilgrimage that would decide the fate of their world. When dawn crept over the valley, the world was a white silence. The snow lay heavy on the roofs, and the river beneath its icy shell groaned like a sleeping beast. Kalo stood at the edge of the village, wrapped in furs, the frozen black feather tied around his neck with a strip of hide. Behind him stood 12 others, men and women who had chosen courage over fear. Among them were Nima, the village healer with silver braids that reached her waist; Oran, the young hunter whose father had died in the first storm; and 2 children, twins named Luma and Sano, who had refused to let their mother face the journey alone. They called themselves the Flame Bearers. Their task was not only to find the raven, but to remember the meaning of fire itself. Before they left, the eldest elder, broken and frail, hobbled toward them. He carried a clay bowl filled with ashes from the last hearth. "Take this," he whispered, his voice trembling like the wind. "The last breath of our fire. Keep it close, and may it guide you through the dark." Kalo bowed his head and took the bowl, feeling its faint warmth pulsing against his palms. The villagers gathered around, their eyes full of both hope and sorrow. As the flame bearers began their climb toward the mountains, the people raised their hands in silent prayer, not to demand, but to remember. The mountains loomed vast and merciless. Snow lashed against their faces, and the air grew thin, burning their lungs with every breath. On the second day, the path disappeared under a fresh storm, forcing them to crawl through drifts that reached their waists. The children cried quietly, their tears freezing before they could fall. Still, Kalo pressed on, driven by something deeper than duty, a promise to restore the soul of his people. The frozen feather against his chest glowed faintly whenever they faltered, pulsing like a heartbeat, leading them onward. It was as though the raven itself watched them from beyond the clouds, testing their resolve. By the fifth night, they reached the foothills of the Great Spine, the tallest mountain in the range, where legends said the world's first fire had been born. They camped in a cave that smelled of ancient smoke. Strange carvings lined the walls, spirals, feathers, and figures with wings spread wide. Mima traced the symbols with her fingers and whispered, "This place remembers," in the silence that followed. They heard it, a deep, rhythmic sound echoing through the stone. Not wind, not thunder. It was a heartbeat, slow and steady, coming from deep within the mountain. The next morning, as the sun rose weak and pale, they climbed higher. The path twisted like a serpent, disappearing into clouds. Shadows moved in the fog, shapes that were not quite human. Oran raised his spear, but Kalo stopped him. "They are watchers," he said softly, "spirits of those who came before us. They mean no harm." The shadows did not speak, but as the group passed, the wind carried whispers that sounded like songs of flame, of warmth, of life. The children clung to their mother, listening in awe. On the seventh day, they reached the peak, a vast plateau of black stone that stretched into nothingness. The cold was unbearable. The air itself seemed frozen. In the center stood a pit, rimmed with ancient markings that glowed faintly red. Above it circled ravens, hundreds of them, their wings blacker than the void between stars. Kalo stepped forward, clutching the feather. "Raven," he shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind, "we have come to return what was lost." His words echoed through the peaks, and then silence. The ravens above stopped mid-flight, hanging motionless in the air. The sky dimmed. The world held its breath. A shadow descended, vast and formless, its wings spreading across the horizon. When it spoke, it was not with sound, but with presence. A deep vibration that shook the mountain to its core. "You come for fire, yet you carry only ash." The voice filled their minds like thunder in their skulls. Kalo fell to one knee, holding up the clay bowl. "Then teach us again," he said. "We have forgotten the balance, but we are ready to remember." For a long moment, the raven said nothing. Then it laughed, a low, echoing sound that rippled through the clouds. "To remember," it said, "you must first unmake what you were." The mountain cracked beneath our feet. The air turned molten. The raven screamed and burst into flame, swirling around the travelers in a storm of fire and feathers. Nima cried out, shielding the children. But Kalo did not move. He stood with the frozen feather in his hand, watching it melt for the first time, a single drop of golden light falling from its tip. And in that moment, Kalo understood that they had not come to take the fire. They had come to become it. The storm of fire and feathers roared like a living creature, devouring the sky. The 12 travelers clung to the frozen ground as the mountain itself seemed to breathe with heat. Kalo could feel the molten air burning his lungs, yet his body remained still, frozen between terror and awe. The golden drop from the raven's feather hovered before him, suspended in the air like a living ember. It pulsed once, twice, and then sank into his chest, searing through flesh and bone. He gasped, clutching at his heart, and suddenly the world around him vanished. He was standing in his village, but it was not as he had left it. The huts were whole, the fires alive, the laughter of children echoing through the night. His mother stirred a pot near the hearth, smiling softly. "You see," she said, "the fire never left us. You only stopped believing when he tried to reach for her." Her face began to melt into smoke. The laughter turned to screams. The flames devoured the homes one by one until nothing remained but ash and bone. Then came the voice again. "Would you still bring fire to those who would burn themselves?" Kilo fell to his knees, choking on smoke. "Yes," he whispered, "because without light, we are not human." The vision shattered like glass, and he was back on the mountain, trembling. Around him, the others screamed as they faced their own trials. Nima stood in a whirl of flames, her body surrounded by ghostly figures, patients she had failed to heal, their hollow eyes staring through her. "You could not save us," one said. "You will fail again." Nima clenched her fists, tears of flame streaming down her cheeks. "Maybe," she said, "but I will still try." The spirits dissolved into sparks, and she collapsed, breathing hard but alive. Oran's test was crueler. He stood before his father, who held a spear across his chest. "You left me to die in the snow," the apparition snarled. "You hunted glory, not life." The boy dropped his weapon, falling to his knees. "I only wanted to make you proud." His father's ghost leaned close, its breath like frost. "Then learn pride's cost." The spear vanished, and the boy wept. When he rose, there was no fear left in his eyes, only quiet strength. The two children, Luma and Seno, faced no fire. Instead, they saw a mirror of themselves, older, colder, their eyes dim. The vision spoke with their own voices. "One day, you will forget why warmth matters." The twins clasped hands and whispered together. "Then we'll remind each other." The mirror shattered, and their affections turned into bright blue birds that flew up toward the clouds. One by one, the travelers passed through the storm of fire, each emerging changed, scarred, but reborn. The flames receded into the sky, revealing a raven once more. Its wings now glowed with a faint, golden shimmer. "You have remembered," the voice thundered. "But fire is not a gift. It is a burden. It will burn what you love if you do not hold it with care." Kalo stepped forward, his skin marked with lines of light that pulsed beneath the surface. "We understand," he said quietly. "Teach us to hold it." The raven lowered its head, and from its beak fell a single coal, small, glowing, alive. It landed in Kalo's open palm without burning him. Around it, the air hummed softly, like a song that only hearts could hear. "Guard this flame," the raven said, "not in stone or in wood, but in spirit. Let it live through your stories, your kindness, your courage. That is how the fire survives." Then the great bird spread its wings, and the world exploded into light. For the first time, Kilo saw the true sky, endless blue stretching over white peaks, the sun blazing high above. The others shielded their eyes, crying out in wonder. The cold wind carried warmth now, and the snow began to melt around their feet. "The fire has returned," whispered Nima, "not to the hearth, but to us." Kilo turned toward the horizon, the coal still glowing in his hand, and he smiled. "Then it's time to go home." The descent was unlike the climb. The mountain that had once loomed, like a frozen wall now, seemed alive, its stones breathing, its cliffs whispering in the wind. The snow softened beneath their steps, melting in rivulets that shimmered with threads of gold. Kilo led the way, holding the living coal in both hands. It glowed gently, neither hot nor cold, pulsing like a heart. The others followed silently, each lost in their own thoughts, their faces marked by the memory of what they had seen. The children no longer cried. Instead, they sang softly, the same melody the blue birds had sung before vanishing into the clouds. By the time they reached the lower ridges, the storm had died completely. The world was drenched in color, the kind of color that made you forget what darkness ever felt like. The trees glistened with dew instead of frost. The river that had once been sealed under ice now danced freely, catching the sunlight in waves of fire. It was as if the mountain itself was rejoicing. When the group stopped to rest, Mina looked at the sky and whispered, "Do you think it will last?" Kilo smiled faintly. "Nothing lasts forever. That's why we must keep it alive." They traveled for 3 days through valleys that had begun to thaw. Along the way, they met villages where people huddled still, afraid to light their dead fires. The flame bearers stopped at each one, sharing the warmth that now burned inside them. Wherever they touched a hearthstone, embers bloomed. Wherever they spoke, frost turned to mist. But it wasn't the coal that lit those flames. It was their spirit, their courage, their stories. The people began to follow them, carrying torches and singing songs that hadn't been sung in generations. When Kalo's group finally reached their home village, the sky was painted with twilight gold. The people gathered in silence, their faces drawn with disbelief. The elders stood before the empty hearth, the same clay bowl of ashes still resting there. Kalo knelt before it and gently placed the coal inside. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft sigh, the ashes stirred. A flicker, a spark, and then fire, real fire. It burst upward, glowing pure and bright, filling the village with warmth and light. The people gasped, some crying, some laughing, some falling to their knees. Children ran in circles, holding their hands toward the glow. "The fire returns," cried one of the elders, tears streaming down his face. "The raven has forgiven us." But Kalo shook his head gently. "The raven gave us no forgiveness, only remembrance. Fire was never lost. We simply stopped deserving it." The people grew quiet at his words. He stood, the golden light dancing across his scarred face. "This flame isn't a gift," he said. "It's a promise. Keep it alive not with wood, but with kindness. Feed it with truth. Protect it from greed." That night, the entire valley glowed with firelight. From hill to hill, hearths were lit. And for the first time in generations, laughter returned to the air. The cold retreated beyond the mountains, and even the stars seemed to shimmer brighter. The flame bearers sat together near the great fire, exhausted but filled with peace. Oran leaned back, watching the sparks rise. "Do you think the raven watches us still?" he asked. Kilo looked up at the night sky, where a single dark bird flew across the moon. "He always does," Kilo murmured. "Not to rule us, but to remind us that warmth is worth the burn." And so the tale of the raven's flame became legend. The children of the valley would grow up hearing it by the fireside. How light returned to the world, not by a god's mercy, but by human courage. Some said that when the fire crackled, you could hear the raven laughing in the smoke. Others said the golden coal still burned beneath the ashes of Kalo's hearth, waiting for the next soul brave enough to seek it. Years passed like the turning of gentle pages. The valley thrived beneath the warmth of its reborn flame. Snow still came, as it always did, but never stayed for long. The people learned balance, to take from the fire only what they needed, to give back in care and gratitude. Children grew up knowing that warmth was not a right, but a responsibility. They listened to the stories told at night, stories of the mountain, the storm of feathers, and the man who walked through fire without burning. And each time the tale was told, the people leaned a little closer to the hearth, feeling the old magic hum through the logs and coals, a reminder that the fire within them was alive. Kilo grew older but never weary. His eyes carried a quiet light, as if the ember inside him had settled into peace. He spent his days teaching the young how to listen to the wind and read the movement of smoke, for he said both spoke the same language if you were patient enough to hear. Nina tended to the village as healer and keeper of the flame. The twins, Luma and Seno, became storytellers, traveling from one valley to another, spreading tales of the raven and the courage of those who sought warmth in the coldest night. The legend lived, not in temples or scrolls, but in the hearts of the living. One evening, as twilight stretched its violet fingers across the sky, Kalo sat before the hearth where it had all begun. The fire flickered gently, no longer roaring as it once had, but steady, like the pulse of a sleeping heart. He could feel the world settling into its rhythm again. The raven's laughter seemed to echo faintly in the wind outside, not mocking, but proud. Kalo smiled, his gaze lost in the glow. "We remembered," he whispered, "and we did not burn." Then, as quietly as a candle surrendering to dawn, he closed his eyes and became part of the warmth he had fought to restore. The people found him the next morning, peaceful, his face lit by the firelight. They did not mourn, not with tears, but with song. They carried his memory not to the mountains, but to the hearts of their children. And when the fire crackled that night, every soul in the valley heard the faint sound of wings passing overhead. Some said it was just the wind, but others knew better. The raven had come to watch one last time, to see the world it had once set alight, now glowing with life again. And so the legend endured through generations, told by the voice of men and women, whispered by the fireside when the world grew dark, retold under new skies, and passed down through ages like an unbroken chain of warmth. The flame never truly died because it was no longer trapped in stone or sky. It lived inside every story, every act of courage, every soul that chose compassion over coldness. That was the true fire the raven had brought, not the burning kind, but the kind that teaches light. So if you're listening to this now, wherever you are, beneath whatever sky, know that the flame is still alive. Every story keeps it breathing. And maybe, just maybe, the raven is listening too, waiting to see if you'll carry that spark forward. Keep your heart warm, your mind gentle, and your spirit awake, for that is where light begins. And if you found peace in this tale tonight, I invite you to keep the flame alive by joining us here at Obsilore, where every legend glows again. Subscribe, stay close, and let the stories guide you into the quiet places of wonder. Until the next fire, rest well, dream softly, and remember, even in the darkest night, the embers still burn.